The challenge, of course, with Ken Wilber's books is there is a requisite of 100 other books, or at least a dozen other books. If someone's interested in consciousness, eventually it leads to Ken Wilber. Tony Robbins, Marianne Williamson, everybody basically says, like, Ken is the lighthouse. Ken, for instance, he's arguably the most brilliant human ever. To bring that back to Grace and Grit, it's really a story about love beyond life. Alex Gray had referred to it when he wrote the review about Grace and Grit. And there's a scene in Tree of Life. These two dinosaurs, they know each other from another existence. And they're like, wait a second, wait a second, wait a second. I know you. That moment exists outside of the stream of time. That moment is transcendent. That moment is eternal. The movie Titanic, I was like, never let go, Jack, never let go. Like, she knows he's dying, but never let go outside of this. And that's, what I use in Grace and Grit is I'll find you. I found you before and I'll find you again. I'm going to see you again. I'm going to find you through different eyes, in a different awareness, through a different experience, but I'm going to find you.
When I first found out about you, Sebastian, was through watching the Ken Wilber movie. And I started digging into your stuff. Then I found out you were into acting, and then you're sort of into fitness, and then you're into philosophy. So you have like a really broad and diverse spectrum. And then that's sort of why I wanted to reach out and get you on the show. I guess, what has been your main focus, or what's your current main focus at the moment? I know you're working on a movie, is that it? Because we're trying to schedule this in.
First of all, I'm thrilled to be here, man. Thank you for that. And I saw, that you had Ken Wilber on, and I was thrilled to see that. I adore him, and he's impacted my life on such a profound level. In terms of the different things that I do, for me, they're all very much the same. They're all about consciousness, and they're all about storytelling. And so my history is really in psychology and philosophy and theater, and these are all strongly interlinked. Even, Fritz Perls was the founder of Gestalt psychology, and he was initially interested growing up in acting, and a lot of the classes and exercises that he took as an actor, he ended up applying to psychology. So even like the empty chair, where you sit in another chair and you talk to your lover or your father or your sibling or whatever the thing is, and then you relate to that. So you take it out here and you can look at it out here, and then you sit in the chair and take on the affect of those things, whether it's the emotion of the individual. And so I think that's indicative of the strong relationship between psychology and theater and film and acting and directing. In other words, they're closely interlinked storytelling, because it's really about the expansion of identity. In other words, i.e., the expansion of perspectives, right? Like, an exceptional actor really understands their place in the piece, and a director as well understands all the elements, not just the actors, but the setting, the rooms, the makeup, the how everything is shot, the lenses, the everything, the voice, the music, etc. And so I think that those tie together very strongly. As a boy, I was very interested in psychology and philosophy and in meditative practices of transcendence. And so then the physicality, my fortune, I think, in the sort of world of fitness was just peripheral. I was not a trainer or a coach or wanting to be in that. I never worked out kind of specifically to get a developed body. That was a part of it, obviously, as a young boy. But it was just that I loved pushing myself to the limit. And then the byproduct of that was feeling and seeing my body change when I was, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And so that was a great positive reinforcement. But ultimately, it was still, for me, about storytelling, that it was about, wow, if I push myself to this limit, then something happens in me, and so then therefore in the world. And I think of storytelling as that, that I think, well, if I have a skill set of being able to tell a story, and I can do that in psychology or in meditation or in movies, in different facets of art, then I want to do that as uniquely and penetrate culture and society as deep as possible.
How does it work, Sebastian? Like, do you own the movie? Did you get investors to come in? Does the studio own the movie? How does it work in the movie industry?
Each movie is different, so, in this particular case, it's made with private equity, and then the distributor ends up taking it over for a period. And then the subsidiary deals, like, let's say with, Netflix or Amazon or Apple, they own it for a period, or it's a rental streaming service like Apple, where there's a split, so it's complex, and it's also changing very radically right now as well.
Does that mean, like, I remember hearing TV shows like Friends, they might have a 5-year contract. Netflix might pay like $100 million to be able to have it on Netflix for 5 years. And after that, you go ahead and shop it, and you can just infinitely do this forever.
Yeah, it depends. Each project's different. It's like similar to a music catalog where
Mm.
someone will own it and you can own it outright, or you can, own it for a period. And each product is different because, film is very interesting because it's like a book. You're melding art and business. Yeah. And so it's really understanding, how is this valuable today? Who wants to consume this content? And will this content increase in value in the future? It's looked at like a business in the way art is in that way also. So like with this particular film, because it's about Ken Wilber and because it's the only movie, that really will be the gateway in years to come for his legacy, I would imagine. His books are very thick and there's a requisite kind of vernacular to get into it, at least his thicker books. And so this is a very soft, gentle intro from an intellectual level, obviously, that film. So I think it's going to have what we call in film long legs. Yeah, that it'll become more popular in years to come, i.e. like the Stephen Hawking film. If people don't read Stephen Hawking, it's not consequential, but if they're curious about who he is as somebody who shaped kind of thought in a particular way, then they will see the Stephen Hawking movie. And likewise, right, with Ken Wilber.
Yeah. Do you go about creating movies that are sort of evergreen, things that can sort of have longevity and it doesn't require a time and place and it can always be sort of relevant?
Do I?
Mm.
Is that the question? It depends. Each project's different. There's a project, I mean, it's got to come from the heart because it's like doing this podcast, right? It's, you want to find an audience and you want to be able to generate a revenue, whether that's commercially or, by increasing viewership, but you've got to love it. Like you've got to love the content, you've got to love what you do. And I think, the film is the same way. There's an organic quality to it where, if somebody really is in it, that's more important than anything else, because there are people who, can spend millions and millions of dollars and still not get a movie made. Yeah. And movies fall apart all the time, movies that are 50 or $100 million. There's this requisite of that I appreciate enormously about really needing to love it, with your soul. And I think that like any art and like any business, but particularly with film, because it is such a strong intersection of art and business, that it's very easy to tell, when someone is in it, fully. And those are the people that are ideal to collaborate with. Yeah, I'm one of those people, and because it takes so much to get it done, right? And it demands so much, and so then therefore it transforms an individual who works on a film so much, and that's why the relationships, I think, in film end up becoming so intimate.
Interesting. I was sort of, before this call, I was sort of reviewing these sort of screen recordings of my appointment setters and sort of I basically watch hours and hours of them reply to people on my behalf, critiquing them and sort of finding all the mistakes. And I've been doing this for the last 3 or 4 months and it's just hours and hours. I'm watching these recordings at 10 times speed. I'm like, man, this is so boring. And then I realized that as a director, you're probably having to watch your 90-minute movie again and again and again. Is that so? And like, how do you sort of make that interesting and not just get burnt out of watching the same thing over and over again?
It lives inside you. When you're, as like, let's take Grace and Grit, for example, the movie about Ken and Treya Wilbur, adapted from his book, the same title, Grace and Grit. And because I adapted the screenplay, right, I had read the book a number of times, and then I had, broken the book down into how I was going to construct it as a story. In other words, what stays in, what stays out, what stays in but happens in a different chronology. And so then I'm very familiar with the work. It's very intimate then to me. And as is with any writer adapting a book. Yeah, but prior to that, I've read almost all of Ken Wilber's books already and, had profound respect and admiration and adoration for his writing and his mind and his voice. So I think it was important to include as a center point kind of his fingerprint of Integral. Yeah. So already at that point, it's pretty intimate to me. So then when we go to shoot it, I'm working with every department as a producer and as a director then after the writing component is completed. And that's very intimate, right? With Mina Suvari, with Stuart Townsend, with Mariel Hemingway, with Francis Fisher, Nick Stahl, everybody who's in the, Rebecca Graff, everybody who's in the movie. There's a very intimate relationship with these individuals who, prior to them portraying those individuals, are real people. Ken and Treya Wilbur, et cetera, et cetera. So then it's another level there. And then with the lighting, and with the lenses and camera, and the production design, where we're shooting it, how we're shooting it becomes intimate. through design of costumes, and then even in makeup. We're talking about things that are physical and real, but we're also describing them in a way that is about how is this going to affect the audience, i.e., for example, to kind of ground that, Ken is wearing colors that are earthy, throughout the movie. It's very specific to his character. He's of the earth. It's masculine. Atreya, portrayed by Mina Suvari, is wearing, she's got purple as like her color. The flowers around her are always purple. She always has a purple scarf or dress, or something in the room is always purple, from the opening to the clothes. Almost always, different shades of that. And the woman who portrays her mother, Frances Fisher, right, who also played the mother in Titanic, she's from Texas, and she's so very, sort of gold and royal and green and blue and like this. And so these aren't things that the audience will pick up on, but it's the things that the audience will feel, right? As an audience person, you feel then the differentials. So then, the next step is, when we are editing it, that's several months. So you're watching every frame, yes, again and again and again. And then when you're scoring it after the picture is locked, then you're watching every frame again and again, and then you're color correcting it, etc., with all these different artists that I'm collaborating with, extraordinary artists in this case. So then when it comes time to show it, I already know the movie. Like, I know it. I know it so well. If I've written it, produced it, and directed it, and collaborated with all these individuals. Yet, if you have a child, right, or a dog, or a pet, or a lover, you know it, and yet each time you see it, maybe you see something new and you experience something new. Now, while a sentient being is growing and changing, and this movie is not growing and changing, I'm still growing and changing. So to answer the question, yes, every time I see it, I've already seen it. I already know what's going to happen. I can feel it. But it always strikes me differently. And perhaps that's because this film is so intimate to me, and because I feel deeply indebted to Ken Wilber just for his work in the world, and his mind is impacted me on such a profound level. So it's always a pleasure for me to watch it, and it strikes me differently. Some moments I laugh, other moments I don't laugh, depending on when I watch it and who I watch it with and what I'm experiencing that day. Some moments I cry, other moments I don't. But it always hits me very, very, very differently. And I always think at the end, when I see the picture of the two of them in the credits, when you have the real actors next to the real people, and some of that video footage of Treya, and then audio of Ken, the actual individuals after the actors, I always, think, I hope that I did these two beautiful humans service, into this thing. So how do I make it watchable for so many millions of times, right, is the question. I think of it as a sort of spiritual experience in service, I suppose.
That's beautiful. Sebastian, how do you go about staying calm when you're sort of doing everything from like lighting, music, makeup, talking to the actors, picking the actors, costumes, set design? Like, that's a lot of responsibilities. How do you like keep yourself from spiraling out?
I tend to have a very Zen quality on set and in general. And I think that Ken has that quality as well. In other words, if you lived 20 years, right, or 15 years, you might panic about things because you haven't had your heart broken enough or had lost enough people or things. But then if you live 100 years or 200 years or 500 years, eventually the sense of humor of God or of spirit or of the cosmos starts to come through, right? In other words, some jokes are short and some jokes are long. Some jokes are just within the same day, but other jokes are long. In other words, there's a fruition and a gestation period to anything in life. Whether it's relationship or, personal growth and awareness. And I think that the nature of the cosmos is to have a sense of humor. I mean, when we look inside of ourselves, it's like this crazy war. And then we look closer and it's pretty amazing, like what's being created. And the same thing we look out at the nebula. It's insane, right? The fire coming off of the sun. And it's like so, torrential. And yet it's spectacular, right? From a distance. And so I think, well, the signs outward, and inward, right? Micro and macro, right? Are there. And so we're a product of that. We're an aspect of that, rather. And so there's no need to panic. Yeah, it doesn't make anything better, It's okay to let go, in that very Alan Watts-esque way, comparing the cosmos or the universe to the ocean, to the water. We have to surrender and let go to flow. If I'm directing a movie, I tend to take that posture. I tend to take that posture in a relationship and everything sort of in my life, I suppose. I give it everything, all of myself. It's important to be passionate and attached, yes, but to also surrender to it. It's a fun puzzle. It's very challenging. Absolutely. It's the challenges on directing a movie, the challenges are gargantuan.
It must be. I was recently in Mongolia, and a lot of the Mongolians, they believe that God comes from within. And once you tap into that or unlock it, there's a shift, there's like an enlightenment. Now, I've been sitting on that thought and thinking about it over the last 1 to 2 months. I still don't fully understand it yet, but sort of what you talked about, how, everything comes from your own perspective within, how you are sort of the controller of your universe. That's sort of what I thought of as you were bringing that up.
It's a perfect analogy. Yeah, it's a beautiful analogy and metaphor. Are you from there?
I'm Vietnamese, but I was just there traveling.
Yeah, beautiful long history there in Mongolia.
Yeah, and I've been also reading sort of Ken Wilber's A Theory of Everything. I've been I'm halfway through the book, and definitely my vocabulary, I'm not there. Like it's a hard read. I'm struggling to understand it. I'm sort of vaguely understanding all the different colors and how humans are evolving and how sort of more sophisticated humans are, like these sort of colors that are higher up, and it's sort of more sort of universal. And if you go down to the lower colors, it's more sort of singular. I guess my question is, how did you go about reading Ken Wilber's stuff? And did you also struggle to understand it at first, or did you have prior sort of philosophical sort of knowledge and books and readings that helped you make it easy to understand?
What a great question for your audience, because, there are so many authors, right, who are extraordinary, whether it's Carl Jung or Freud or, contemporarily, Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote The Four Agreements, or Marianne Williamson or Anthony Robbins or Joe Dispenza or James Hollis, kind of the founder of the Jung Center. Most of these people I'm very close with, and they've been wonderful influences on my life, and have become peers. And a lot of the power in so many of their works is that they're profound in being able to point things out about life. And also the power in their works are that you can pick up like Eckhart Tolle's book or Anthony Robbins' book or Marianne Williamson's book, and you can just start reading it. Yeah, and it doesn't require a specific vernacular or a requisite. And it could, people will say, I just read, The Four Agreements, and it meant the world to me. And I love Don Miguel Ruiz. He's one of my dearest friends. I'm actually seeing him in a couple of days. And that's the power of that, is that anyone can pick it up, and it can transform anyone. It can help someone through something. The challenge, of course, with Ken Wilber's books is there is a requisite of 100 other books, or at least a dozen other books, right? Because the vernacular is thick. And he, I think, many authors are writing for a popular audience to make it accessible. And I think Ken writes really to kind of drive the edge of consciousness evolution. Yeah, and that's why so many people who read Ken have a story about how'd you figure, how'd you fall in love with Ken Wilber's mind, right? And then once you start reading Ken Wilber, right, once anyone starts reading, you have to always come back because it's so right on the edge. Yeah, it's right on the cusp of consciousness evolution. In other words, what he's iterating is really pushing the limits, of what's possible with thought and perception and language. And so, yes, at first, I came across A Brief History of Everything, and it was coming to me from all angles. It was very interesting. There was an artist who had said that her father loved it, and that she reminded me of him, and I was interesting. And then there was someone else who said, "Listen, this guy I know is very much like you, and before he died, this was all he read." And I said, "Oh my!" So that was it. Then I was like, "Oh, I better get into this, right? The world's telling me something." And it was thick and it was slow at the beginning, but I literally took a month out of my life and I sat with that book and I just took it everywhere with me. And I was so impressed and in awe of it that I read it so slowly, and I wanted to not just comprehend it, right, but really own it. I didn't want the things to be just intellectual. I wanted to really embody the things because they were so profound. I never read anything like it, And I was a voracious reader, particularly at that time. So then when I got into it and I read that book so slowly, and I filled it with notes, A Brief History of Everything. And that A Brief History of Everything is a great book because it's really the kind of a truncated, abridged version of Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, right? Which is like an 800-page tome, kind of like Ken's magnum opus, right, if you will. Then after that, all his work, I was so embedded in it that it became just natural to me. And then, the vernacular became pedestrian and familiar to me, if you will.
When you sort of first discovered Ken, what was that awness? What was that like, wow, like this is completely different? What was that shift that you were absorbing and learning about?
I think it's a great question, and to draw an analogy to make it very specific about Ken Wilber, for any of the audience who hasn't read him yet, if someone's interested in consciousness, eventually it leads to Ken Wilber, right? Tony Robbins, Marianne Williamson, whatever, everybody basically says like Ken is the lighthouse, Alex Gray, etc. All the most brilliant people in the world are reading Ken Wilber. That's where it's at. I think that, when I first started reading him, I wasn't aware of that. I got into it, and the analogy is Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time, describes from the Big Bang up until today, the entire physical universe and how it's evolved, right? And it's a great book, and he's got a great sense of humor, right? It's one of the most bought and unread books, like after the Bible, I think, Hawking's A Brief History of Time. So Ken's book, A Brief History of Everything, is comparable, but it's not just the physical universe, right? It's also, how does emotion evolve? How does consciousness particularly evolve? How do societies and religions and thought and love and, in other words, these things, how do we evolve out of these things and through these things? And I just never read something so poetically powerful and intellectually astute, and the references were so extraordinary, it was actually Ken, who got me into William Joseph von Schelling, and Hegel, and because he was just referring to so many of the books that he'd read that had impacted him, Ramana Maharshi as well, Adida as well, and his mastery of being able to take all of that material and synthesize it into something with this poetic force, that's both tender with this feminine quality and encompassing and inviting, but masculine and strong with such incredible direction. And I think he's got this unbelievable sense of humor. Yeah. I mean, I whenever I read his stuff, I always laugh out loud because I'm in awe, and for one, and then he's always doing something really interesting and funny, paradoxical.
When people say getting into and learning about consciousness, what does that mean? So the things that come into my mind, I think of qualia, I think of simulation theory, I think of like, is my experience the same as you? I think of like, what is outside of the Big Bang, like that's all the things I think of. Is that a part of consciousness, or is consciousness completely different?
Yeah, what a great question. Those things are all aspects of it. I mean, consciousness precedes reality, right? Out of something comes out of nothing, right? Not the other way around, right? Like people come out of people. I mean, you think about that just to begin with, it's pretty outrageous. Like people come out of people, right? It's, and I think that, and, the universe, the cosmos, God, spirit, whatever, has a great sense of humor in that way. That, in other words, like even if we look at like scientifically, let's say the Big Bang, and there's this potent energy source, and then out of that come, protons, neutrons, electrons, and then molecules, and then life, sentient life, etc. And it evolves from that. And so it seems like consciousness evolves on the edge of that, and consciousness is always evolving and changing, right? Like it's this dynamic holographic extrapolation of what, of just consciousness itself, right? It's just a play, being extrapolated, of which we are an aspect. So we're driving it, we're also an aspect of it. And if you think, even the map that we're using to articulate this is a product of it, an aspect of it, right? So words can only go so far. And I think that's, in other words, how can you draw something with an aspect of the entity or poetry or light, or that is, being extrapolated, right? In other words, it's ineffable. And I think that, brings us to a wonderful sort of point about Zen, that there is something that we immediately know about love and about life and about being that can't be said with words. And so that's why as humans we use art and architecture and language and music and movies to try to say things that we know somewhere inside, but we can say them infinite number of times. Like how many love stories are there? And we're just getting started. How many love songs are there, right? How many brilliant, buildings or statues, you know, or paintings, yeah, or poems. Because as we change, the poetry changes, right? As we change individually and collectively, the myth changes, yeah, in the very Joseph Campbell-esque way. It's a new myth, you know, that we need to define our new being. You know, we've grown, we're larger, right, as a collective. And so therefore the myth is deepening, right? And so I think that all those elements that you describe, right, you know, the Big Bang and, you know, the stars and the sun and our human bodies, yes, are manifestations of consciousness, artifacts of consciousness.
When you talked about this growth, this building, this sort of, as an individual, we're sort of building this beautiful story of our life, and it's ever changing, ever evolving. It keeps stacking, and you learn new skills, you go through different experiences, you go through ups and downs, and then it sort of accumulates, and then you just die. I guess as I was saying, I was like, okay, I guess the lesson is like enjoy and really enjoy that journey up there, because it's eventually gonna disappear. It does feel a bit sad that it sort of drops off and it's like, oh wow, okay, I guess that's the end of the story.
I really appreciate that you brought this up. In one way, yes, but in another way, not at all. And the differential between those is who's the I and what's the dropping off, right? And like, so i.e., you have this gross body and this sense of self, right? Andy, you know, I feel like this person doing this in this world, right? And I care for these things and these people and these, you know, I, Sebastian, same, right? And so that experience is relatable. And, you know, the ego, which doesn't actually exist, but it's a word that we use to describe something, which is essentially the sense of self, right? A sense of, you know, who we are in the world and by how we operate, right? That needs for the perpetuation, right, of existence to hold on and to be passionate and to want to live, right? And yes, that dies, right? At the end of X number of years or time or whatever, that dies and it falls off. And that's the sadness, right, that you talk about. And that should be that way. Yeah. The end of a kiss is beautiful, but the end of a kiss, it kind of leaves you wanting more, right? In some way, it's satisfying, it's enough, but then you still want another, right? At some juncture. Now, what Ramana Maharshi calls the I behind the I, it doesn't drop off. It actually goes on. And the embodiment of that, in other words, from the perspective of spirit, this is really fun. I mean, this is really a good time from the perspective of spirit. It doesn't matter if you live or die, right? There's something beyond. Yeah. And I think that intrinsically, we as individuals know that. And that's why we have religion. And that's why we do rituals, you know, to celebrate rites of passage, whether it's birth, puberty, or death, marriage, etc. Because we intrinsically know that. And even someone who says, look, not religious, I'm not spiritual, you ask them, well, okay, your lover dies, what do? You just put him in the garbage chute and go on with your day? You know, no, probably you bury him or you know, burn them or have some sort of something. But why? If you really don't believe, why? Because all on a fundamental level, intrinsically, we all know that it goes on forever. Even animals, you know, they look and they smell and they can see the other animal's dead. It's not there anymore, but there's something there still, right? Something perpetuates on, you know, something, you know, the something percolates, yeah, outward. And I think that intrinsically we all know that, yeah, that it's given. So in the terms of, you know, to bring that back, like to Grace and Grit, it's really a story about love beyond life. And, you know, in that film, as articulated in the book, these two individuals meet each other in this brief life, and they feel like they've always been looking for each other, and they're looking for each other in their dreams in the movie, which is how I draw the subtle world. And just at the moment they find each other, right? And they're like, oh my God, we found each other. Can you believe this? Nothing like this has ever happened to me. Like, this is so bizarre. And they're both in awe. They can't even express it, you know? And just at that moment, then they're torn apart, right? That she dies. And it seems tragic. And it is heart-wrenching. But it's beautiful, because when she passes, it's like they've had this awareness that even though they're ripped apart from this life, they found each other just at the right moment to be able to see each other, that they know they've been dancing outside of the stream of time and for millions of years inside of the stream of time. And I think that's the story that I was really trying to tell in that movie, right? Which is why it's for some people, it's hard, it's intense to watch, On a more accessible level, if you think about the movie Titanic, right? Everybody knows it's about a ship that sinks and, he dies at the end. But everybody loves that movie. It's so romantic. Why? Right? It's like the end of the movie, never let go, Jack, never let go. It's so beautiful. I love that film. The movie is not about the sinking of a ship, just like Grace and Grit is not really about cancer. It's not really about an illness. On one level, it is. On one level, Titanic is about the sinking of a ship. The ship is sinking the whole movie, just like in Grace and Grit. They're being daunted with this thing the whole time. But it's really about two individuals on a boat on the Titanic, and their life doesn't work outside of that boat because the boat is sinking. They're confronted with their mortality. And so they say, you know what? I don't care about the rules of society and the paradigms. We're going to love each other, and we might be ripped apart at any moment from this world, but we're going to dance beyond this lifetime. Yeah, and that's what's so romantic about the end of that film. It was like, never let go, Jack, never let go. Like, she knows he's dying. This is it, right? But never let go outside of this. And that's, what I use in Grace and Grit is I'll find you. I'll find you. I found you before and I'll find you again. That this is heart-wrenching in this moment to be ripped away from you. But, I'm going to see you again. I'm going to find you through different eyes, in a different awareness, through a different experience. But I'm going to find you. When we were in edit on my movie on Grace and Grit, and when I was in color, and people have talked about Terrence Malick a little bit around this film, and particularly in Tree of Life. There's this. Did you see Tree of Life? Okay, it's Terrence Malick made the movie. It's with George Clooney and Sean Penn and Brad Pitt, and I mean it's extraordinary, right? But it's a really esoteric film, yeah. But I bring it up because there were some references. Alex Gray had referred to it when he wrote the review about Grace and Grit. He wrote about Tree of Life and about The Fountain also. And there's a scene in Tree of Life that kind of people who are cinephiles talk about, where there's a dinosaur and it comes across another dinosaur, a smaller dinosaur, and it puts its hoof, paw, hand, foot, whatever, on top of the other dinosaur's head, like it could just crush it. It's very dominant. But it doesn't. And then it goes off. But it seems like a non sequitur to a lot of film critics or cinephiles. Like, why all of a sudden in the middle of this movie with all these people is there this dinosaur scene? For me, I cried in that moment. And it was the only moment that was emotional, super emotional for me. And for me, the whole movie's right there. And there's this kind of online debate about, is the movie better with it or without it, right? And for me, that is the whole movie. Why? And it's because exactly what you brought up, right? That it's painful to die. It's painful to let go. It's painful to lose each other. Like you said, like what's the solace? We just live and then we just drop off, right? Like, what's the point, right? These two dinosaurs, they know each other from another existence, right? And they can smell it. Yeah. And they're like, wait a second. I know you. And then they go on. And that's it. Just that moment. But that moment exists outside of the stream of time, right? That moment is transcendent. That moment is eternal. And that's the picture that I try to draw with Grace and Grit. And so I think that your instinct and your intuition, right, in bringing that up, I really appreciate it. That is at the crux of all of my work, whether it's in storytelling and psychology or movies or meditation, or even in health, and fitness. It's really about pushing the levels, pushing towards death, not with the intent to die, pushing towards death with the intent to live forever. And when I say forever, I mean transcendently beyond the stream of time, not like more years.
As you're saying all that, I was having like flashbacks to like moments where, there'll be a spider on the wall. I'm going up to like spray it or kill it. And then something just tells me to just leave it. And I just leave it and I go on about my day. And it's just weird. It's like something just strikes me and I'm like, let's just leave it. And I just go on and I don't even, and I forget that moment was even in a moment.
What a great instinct. Yeah. And that's, I think that's right on the nose. Something is communicating with us through us all the time, right? And we can't try to hear it, right? We just have to hear it. Sometimes we hear it more than others. You think about what makes a life, how do we decide what to eat or who to kiss or what to be upset by or what to be excited by? How do we decide what to write or read or express, or it's happening through us. Yeah. So in the same way, like dovetailing back into the, our stream of thought about the extrapolation of consciousness and the Big Bang and these physical bodies, it's always happening through us. Like, and I think that the way, the best analogy for that is like, you think about swallowing, right? I swallow and it's both voluntary and involuntary. Or signing your name is a great one. You sign it and you kind of have an intent, but it's effortless, and then it's beautiful, your signature. But if you try too hard, the signature sucks, right? It's like dancing. It's like orgasm. It's like digestion. It's like all these things that are so fundamental to us. If we try too hard to breathe, but if we just, and we know not to force it, but to have an intent, it's let go to hold on is what I call it. And I wrote that into Grace and Grit a couple times. There's a scene where they split up and she's in the shower alone with her head shaved, and she's thinking back about how they were madly in love, what seems like a million years ago, and they're sitting in the same shower laughing and in love, and she's crying, and she's like, she says, let go to hold. Mina Suvari, who's playing Trey, she says, let go to hold on, let go to hold on, meaning we have to surrender, right? We have to give ourselves to the ocean to know how to swim. Yeah.
I love sort of conversations like this. It taps me into this whole sort of different world where I can really feel that how great and beautiful the world we are in and how infinite it is. But then yet, 2-3 hours from now, I can be just sucked onto my phone and chasing dopamine and scrolling through TikTok and snacking and eating and going back to working to earn money to keep myself alive. And it feels like these two complete opposite things. Do you try to get to a place where you can be Zen throughout it all, and sort of with practice that becomes more and more of your life, and you go through work, you go through eating with a sort of Zen sort of perspective, or it is a back and forth?
Yeah, it is a back and forth. Yeah, what a confident and graceful, the way you express that, because the situation of being human is messy business. It's tough, and I think that in the same way, you look at a rainbow, right? It's so beautiful, and you stare at it, and it's just like you can't get enough. And then the best way to really see it is to look away and then to look back. Even if you're looking at the gradation of light in the sky early in the morning before the sunrise or at sunset, like from orange and then purple and then dark, and the blues in between, the pinks in between. It's almost like you have to look away to look back. Same thing like with the moon's been full, right? Last couple of nights. You look at the moon, it's outrageous. We've been looking at this thing since before we had eyes, if you will, since we were like molecules in the ocean. It's so powerful, and you have to look away to look back. So I think that in some ways, that like what you're saying is, the balance. At some point you're in it, and then you have to go back, because it is let go to hold on, right? Like, there's this famous, discussion, right? Like between Alan Watts and Aldous Huxley. And it's like, hey, listen, I just want you to know that I've given this whole thing about Zen up. I'm going to get as deeply attached as I can and passionate about absolutely everything, and that is the game, right? It's like, for example, if we play Monopoly, if you don't care at all, then you don't get disappointed at all. But then you don't have any fun. You have to care enough to get into the rules, and really into the thing. But if you care too much, right, and you that it becomes a fight and a struggle, that's too much, right? And so there is this sweet spot between everything. And I think that we know, and the cool thing is there's no map for it. We have to just trust and know. And I think that intuition, that omega point pull to evolve, becomes more and more important instinctually and intuitively now, particularly with the emergence. You have AI, and automation, that in other words, it's like, we've got to, this life, it's so brief, right? And, to be passionate, and to be heartbroken and to be excited, and to be enravaged and in rapture. It's the greatest thing. And it wants to come through us, and we ought to let that come through us. I mean, that, if for no other reason, is what drives the perpetuation of the species, and it's brutal and it's hard and it hurts, but it's glorious and it's gorgeous.
That Monopoly metaphor was like, it was a major light bulb moment. It was like, wow, that's a metaphor for life. Like if you go at life with not a care at all, then it's sort of not that fun. And if you put in too much care into life, buy every single piece of property you come by, and trying way too hard, and you're losing money and you lose the game, now you're sort of let down because you set that expectation. But if you go through life with that balance, as you're mentioning, Monopoly becomes fun, and life becomes fun.
So much so, thank you. And also the relationship with the others at the table. That when there's this freedom and there's fun, people want you to win and you want others to win, right? Because it's so loose. But if it tries too hard to win, then it becomes all of a sudden it sows a sourness in the relationships. When if someone wants to win so much, it's like, no one likes it. It's too oppressive, right?
That's so true. When you brought up AI, I heard this person saying eventually there's going to be an AI where you feed it the Bible, the Quran, philosophers, Aristotle, and it's people going to be praying to this new God. Like, what happens when you sort of take an integral approach and just give it every single pieces of data? Can it surpass some human that manually sift through all these vast sort of info?
On some level, yes, but on another level, no. And I think that it's such an important question that we always should keep asking ourselves, the question you just asked there, right? Because, yeah, the age of data collection is already over, right? I mean, whether it's the iWatch or the phone or the computer or the glasses or whatever the thing. I mean, essentially, it's really coming to the point, right, where we don't need to memorize anything, that it's accessible to us, right? But the memorizing of stuff and the reading of stuff, obviously, it drives neurological connections and the emergence of new neurological connections. And so therefore, that is the extrapolation of consciousness, right, on a physical level, right? That's the physical correlate, right, with the expansion of the extrapolation of consciousness, like new neurological connections, new romantic connections, or love connections, or friendship connections, or compassionate or tender connections with an animal or a person or the world or nature, whatever the thing is. And so, yes, pretty soon, very soon, yeah, I mean, the synthesis of all knowledge, it's there, right? And so, like in, what was that movie, The Deep Blue, right, where the Gary Kasparov plays the IBM computer, yeah, sure, right? Anything can be quantified and the computer will be better, no question about it. And so then there's some derivative integration of how our technology then drives human life forward into some sort of more, if we construct it correctly, some sort of healthier, dynamic, evolutionary version of us. Yeah. Now, so in one way, yeah, right. We can't compete with that. We can't keep up. However, on the other side of that, the evolution of consciousness itself, the omega point pull to evolve, isn't about progress or an end product, right? It's only a play. And what I was saying there about the age of data collection, like, if everybody uses Chat GPT, well, why read anything? Why write anything? I mean, it scares me, that one, and when I say scares me, meaning I'm not daunted by the future of it. I think it's a great product, fine. I don't particularly use it, because if I start to depend on that, how am I going to forge my own ideas? Like this conversation that you and I are having right now, right? I'm only alive and you're only alive and expressive and articulate in so much as you've taken the time to read the books and write the content and develop it and cultivate it, right? And I think that becoming, speaking interpersonally becomes more and more valuable and important going forward with the automation of things. I mean, Waze or Google Maps, etc., I think indicate that you can move to a city and drive around and have no idea where you're going because you use Waze all the time, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? Maybe it's not necessary, but there is something about, and it's like same thing like with the calculator, right? Like the calculator is great, no need to really learn math, but it's not the product that's important. In other words, it's not the quotient or the end result of being able to figure out the mathematical thing. The process of doing it drives new neurological connections and therefore excitement, anticipation. Yeah. And that is life itself. The purpose and the meaning of life is not progress. That's an aspect of it, but it's not the purpose. And I think that's the part where people fall off thinking, the purpose of life is total achievement and progress. And that's not, yeah. To be process oriented towards something, like to have a goal and going somewhere, yeah, is great, because then all our cells align with that. Our telos goes there, yeah. But same thing, like in the Monopoly set, it can't be like, my mission here isn't really to win here. It's really to have fun. But I want to focus on winning the game because that makes it more fun, right? It's like, why do people go fishing, right? Is it to catch fish? Well, if you're hungry and you need to catch fish, yeah, it's to catch fish. But it's not really why people buy a boat and get a bunch of fishing rods. It's not really why, You're not fishing to catch fish, you're catching relationship. You're catching God. You're catching nature, right? We're catching each other, and maybe we share things that we wouldn't otherwise share. And I think that's, that's really at the crux. That's at the crux of it. Yeah. I think to kind of borrow something really from Alan Watts in the same way that to use another analogy in terms of where's AI going and, is progress, everything. If two people are on a dance floor, right, or one person, and you're dancing, like, what's the objective? Like, if AI can already tell you where you're going to end up on the dance floor, is that okay? I'm going to end up 7 feet from here, and during the whole dance, I'm going to dance 20 feet that way, 50 feet that way, 3 feet this way. I'm going to be up, down, and that's where I'm going to. So okay, so what? So AI's figured it out. That's where I'm going to end up. But that's not the point of the dance, right? It is to express and to let go and to be so present and alive, or at least find moments where we can be present and alive and free. That's the point of the dance. It doesn't matter where we end up on the floor. Yeah. And so then therefore the music also, right? It doesn't end with dun 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 dun, right? It's the whole juxtaposition between dun 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 dun, and we anticipate something coming, and the excitement and breath in that. So I appreciate you brought it up, because I think it's something that's very important right now, and it's an important question to keep asking, because the only way we can come to that answer of being process oriented, like everybody knows, like the Eckhart Tolle book, be here now, Ram Dass, be here now. Like everybody knows, right? Just be here now, just be present, right? But it's an exercise. And that exercise is only realized like in the way that you describe this bug in your house, and you go over to the bug and something tells you, let it go. They're not wrong, right? But something, and it's you following the instinct, not overthinking it, but trusting it, feeling it to know. And then that carries over then to your instincts with everything else. Yeah. And I think that people are having a particularly tough time in a lot of ways socializing now, because there's been so much automation of interpersonal communication through digitization on social media, Instagram, Facebook, what have you, that people don't know how to show up and read small cues and pick up subtle cues, between eyes dilating and skin blushing, or somebody moving their fingers, things that we don't think about. We're not interpreting them, but we're subconsciously interpreting them. Yeah. And I think that those things become more and more important because they hone our instincts. And why is that important? Because that is life itself, right? That is the extrapolation of consciousness. Yeah, being able to subtly do those things. So AI doesn't do that. In other words, it can do it, it can simulate it, and it's going to be simulating that very, very soon from now. But the objective isn't the end result, right?
When you mentioned sort of having, a focus, having a goal, sort of something to just point you in a certain direction, how do you go about that? Like, for example, I know, I guess I want to make money, I want to be able to travel, I want to meet beautiful people, I want to have amazing conversations, and I guess in general, I just want to have fun. But these are so many different things. Do I just go ahead and just point towards having fun, figuring out all these different things?
I love that question. I have an office in Venice, California, and for therapy, for couples therapy, as a therapist, then I bring it up obviously in the workshops that I do, and the meditative practices and kind of lucid dreaming things. And the world is very generous to individuals with a focus, and the focus can always change. And I love that question, because that's one that has to be asked every day. I think also kind of to set the day, or the night before, that if we're focusing on something, let's say we're on a boat and we're going towards an island, we're going there, and the movement of our intent and our emotions and our cells and the boat itself, and we're going towards there. Yeah. And then something else happens, a whale or a storm, and it carries us elsewhere. And that's perfectly okay. What an adventure. Yeah. But if we just aren't going anywhere, the boat doesn't do very well. A wave comes and the boat's over. It drifts out, and it in other words, there's an intrinsic, drive towards entropy. Yeah, that if we don't take care of ourselves, we decompose. Life itself decomposes. And so I think having a goal is so important. And living in a place like California, many people come without goal, a dream or something, but without a goal. And it's this cities now, so many cities are metropolitan, throughout the world, but to not have a goal it hurts on the inside, and it doesn't matter what the goal is, it doesn't really matter. We go after it, and then anything can happen. Yeah. In other words, in that very sort of providence, occurs, that God, the universe, these forces come to lift us up, right? Seemingly. That's the nature, the very fabric of existence. To tie it back to the boat, you've got the sail up and you go, and then the wind comes at just the right moment and it takes you in the boat and you go and and who knows, right? And you're going to go climb a mountain. There's this movie out, last year, 14 Peaks, but this incredible climber, right? And he climbs like the highest 14 peaks, and like, it's just insane, and he shows up at camp one day at K2, right? One of the highest mortality rate climbs in the world, right? More than Everest, not as tall, but much harder, and he, one of the reasons why is because there's this overhang of ice, and, you climb up, and then you have to, at some point, right, to summit, you have to go underneath this giant, chunk of ice, right? It's like, humongous. And the chances of that, if that falls, like, everyone's dead. Like, immediately, right? So he gets there and everyone's like freaked out and they don't know what to do, and it's like the temperature and it's that thing. He says, well, okay, we're gonna go right now, we're gonna go at night. And they're like, no, it's too freezing. But it's perfect because it's so cold that thing definitely won't fall. Right? And it opens everyone's minds, and they're like, and he's so confident that they just go with him, and all these people summit, right? And I think that that's also the nature of life. You take a stab at it, and I think that that's demonstrated on the most fundamental levels throughout the fabric of life. Even like with the sperm and the fallopian tube going to the egg, it's like, it's going somewhere, it's going somewhere, and it gets there. And then what happens, right? It's embraced, and then here comes a person, in other words, here comes this whole new universe, right? Out of this connection, right? But it all originates with a direction. And so I think, in short, the direction doesn't matter, but yeah, to have one is important.
The thing that I sort of started thinking about as you were sort of sharing that was, it's crazy, like I'm scared of death, I'm scared of going broke, yet every time I've gone close to it, the fabric of the universe has lifted me up, put a stranger into my life that guided me out of this forest, or for some reason I just got accepted for this grant and all of a sudden that's now funding my business. And usually the most epic stories and growth comes from these near death, near sort of broke situations. Yet we've been sort of raised in a way where we are constantly saving, constantly stacking. And we're scared to ever go back to nothing or go to sort of near death sort of experiences. Obviously I'm not recommending people to sort of look and try to die, but like, I've never died before, I've never gone broke before, yet I'm scared of it, and yet every time I have, the universe has come to save me. So what if I break this thought and trust the universe and keep sort of trying to create these beautiful stories and growth experiences?
This paradox, right, between wanting to hold on to life, and to not be afraid. And that's the same thing, right, when we were talking about you die and like, what's the point? You live X number of years and you die and you fall off, right? And it's the same thing, right? It's the I and the Ramana Maharshi, the I, the little I, the me here now that identifies as Andy or Sebastian or what have you, right? And then there's this greater I, that's transcendent I, that is well aware that everything goes on, yeah? And we're supposed to identify with the I here now because that's the way we stay here now, and we can live on at least for another day, right? Yet there's something that, we have this will to kind of like have children or, cultivate things beyond ourselves, right? Because there's this deep intrinsic awareness that it goes on forever, right? Because we're a product of that, we're a product of that but the very fabric on a molecular level, right? We're a product of that. And the first probably viral image, if you will, right, is Thich Nhat Hanh, right? Who lit himself on fire, right? When that famous image of the Buddhist guy, and he's lit himself on fire to protest not being able to celebrate the Buddha's birthday, right? You look at that photo and he is there and he's burning alive. I think about him when I get in the ice bath. Sometimes I keep my ice bath very cold, right at 0 and full of ice. I think about him because it's so powerful, because he's not, it's not that he's courageous, it's not that he's disciplined, because that can't let an individual do that, right? Courage and discipline are things that expand the sense of identity and self here and now. He's done the opposite. He's surrendered sense of small self and ego and identity to the big self, spirit, and the I behind the I and the beyond. And so when he sits down to light himself on fire, that's really what he's saying. He's saying this is so much bigger than what it is to be human. This is so big. And if we're going to celebrate the Buddha's birthday, we're going to do it, you know? And I'm not in this existence without that ability to do that. And I'm going to show you right now, because I'm going to exit this existence. I mean, that is really, I love that photo. It's very interesting because I put that photo on my social media and it's blacked out. Like you have to click on it to see it, right? And I thought, ooh, that's interesting, you know? Like that concept is intimidating to people. You know, it scares people who want to hold on to life too much. And I even heard it for a moment there when you said it, like I'm not purporting or suggesting or hoping people push towards death, right? It was your instinct to say, I need to be gentle, because we feel suicidal. We feel like we want it to end. And I tend to take a pretty assertive place on that too. Like it's good to have death right there on the other side of the pillow. It's important. It's important for a sense of humor. It's important for progress, because then it helps us like not care so much. It's like, well, all right, I'm going to die, you know, like it's okay, you know, like it's not the worst thing that can happen, right? You know, and I think about that, like even with Nanduk, and I also think about like with Martin Luther King, you know, when he was assassinated, like he gave that speech, you know, shortly before about climbing to the promised land and saying intuitively, I may not make it there with you, you know, but I'm going to climb up the mountain, you know, and I can see it and I can feel it. I can intuit it in the future. And it was very interesting because he was fighting, you know, at a time and he was protesting for the sanitary workers to get a raise, you know, and right after he was assassinated, they got the raise. You know, he was, in other words, he achieved in death something that he couldn't achieve, you know, even in life, you know, so I think about that's wow. And that's, I think, what we celebrate, right? One of the things we celebrate when we think about Thich Nhat Hanh or we think about Martin Luther King, you know, wow, the ability, in other words, to embody the I behind the I. I like to take that stance when I work out, when I exercise, when I read Ken Wilber. It's like the most challenging work, you know, when I first discovered it. And I thought, wow, this is really touching the edge. I got to do that. I mean, that's as good as it gets, right? And so I get into that. And when I make a movie, I try to go about it in that way too, right? Like making Grace and Grit is a tough one. Like nobody wants to make that film. You know, many people came before me to try to make that film and couldn't get it done because it's a hard one, you know, because it's really a story about transcendence. And I think that for me personally, if I'm doing lucid dreaming or if I'm storytelling, whether it's in psychology or lucidity or film, for me personally, the practice of exercise, I'm trying to go beyond, knowing that I can't go beyond totally. I can, right, die and go beyond, but I want to taste it at least a little bit. That's always what I'm after, tasting that a little bit, you know, and in relationship too, you know, tasting that beyond just a little bit. Yeah. Makes the price of the candle, and it's worth the price of the candle.
When it comes to relationships, is it possible to meet that next person that pushes the circle and is like, wow, I did not know this person existed. I did not know this type of relationship is out there for me. And then something outdoes that and just keeps outdoing itself. And is it healthy to keep wanting that next thing versus settling with what you finally sort of came across?
Settling is a tough word, right? You know, and I think that's a challenge. Like, I don't think it's good to I think, you know, settle, right? And it's, you know, neither here nor there, but how does the bee know which flower to pollinate, right? Like from a distance, all the flowers look the same. Right? How does the flower know which bee to invite? You know, from a distance, all the bees look the same. And so it's like that with people. Like pretty much from a distance, we all look the same, basically. Like, you know, from far enough away, it's like we're basically the same animal, you know. But when we get inside, you know, the majesty of the world, you know, of how somebody cries and laughs and what they share and how they feel, how an individual feels is pretty epic and pretty majestic. Yeah. So at some juncture, it's two-pronged. One is saying, all right, in short, you know, to start with the answer and then I'll go backwards into the explanation. Yeah, it's important to choose someone who has a great capacity for growth. That's the most important thing, right? One of the most important things in relationship, right? Whether it's lover or friend or colleague. The capacity for growth indicates that this story is going to keep unfolding in dynamic ways. And if we think about relationship, like the purpose in relationship, right, is not to have fun, right? We want as much fun and joy as we can, right? For sure. And that's our job. That's our duty to cultivate that, right? But it's something far greater than fun. It's becoming, yeah, that I get to know myself through you. You get to know yourself through me. We get to know ourselves through each other. And if someone else is signed up for that, oh, it's going to be scary, it's going to be daunting, it's going to be timid, it's going to be exciting, then that implies that can go on 100 years. Like, like with a lover or a friend, like we're going to have forgiveness for sure, right? We're going to grow in radical ways. That can go a long time. The highs at some level, yes. And I think that the danger about what you brought up about, again, another relationship, like implying, I think romantically, right, that it's dangerous online. And you look at, people dating online, let's say, for instance, and this comes up a lot, right, in my practice or in my workshops. There's 8 billion people, right? Like, how many people can we possibly meet, right? And so there's this idea that there's some person out there that's going to like fit perfectly. This is a real dangerous situation, right? Because the similarities are the touch points that keep us together. Like, we share the same language, we have these basic interests, etc. But the differences is where the magic is. The differences is where we both grow, right? The differences between two individuals is where the action is. Then we shape a little bit. We start to shape a little differently. And if we continue to grow, we're going to continue to shape. Yeah. People are really, the rate of depression is very high right now, and profound too. And loneliness, I think, because so many people are dating online. There are great stories where two people meet one another, and it works out. But for the most part, there are people, it builds in a sense of expendability, right? That somebody looks at someone. Imagine if you're like, dating, and you only have a choice between, like, you're only going to get a few, right? You're going to really look at, like, want to really look at it and feel it. But people do it long enough. They're just like, oh, no, I don't like this, I don't like that. They're looking for what they don't like versus what they do like, right? It's just, in other words, there's always the bigger, better deal. It's not enough wealth. It's not enough height. It's not enough, whatever the thing is, right? We're constantly the hungry ghost, it's never enough. And so I think, yes, at some juncture, it's very important to say, to pick up on in our personal practice. And like, for me, my own personal practice is feeling the subtleties in the world, and we practice that daily, like in the same way you had that experience with the bug in your house, right? Really, like you go to the coffee shop, or you go to the restaurant, or you go somewhere, you pass someone on the street, and you get eye contact, and you're just like, that's cool, man. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but it's cool, and then that carries over into personal relationship, where you're like, you get eye contact, and you're like, fuck, this is cool. Like, this is amazing, this is amazing. I had this experience with Ken when he and I first met, and I flew to go see him, but long before I knew I was going to be part of Grace and Grit. And we were sitting there for several hours, eye to eye. And there was a bunch of people who sit in the room and just listen to the conversation and take notes. That's what it's like talking to Ken Wilber, right? It's like it's got this red couch, and it's famous. You can look up, like, you look at Tony Robbins and Ken Wilber images, and you'll see Tony and his wife Sage. They're so beautiful, and sitting and talking to Ken, And so I sat on that red couch, right, a lot. And we were sitting there one time, there was this long beat, long period of silence. We were just looking at each other, and we were just like looking at each other, his brown eyes, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and we're just there. And I can't look away. We're just looking, and he says, "This is a miracle. And it really struck me in a way, boom, like this light bulb, like everything he's written, it's right there. This is it. It's so simple. It's so fundamental. Like, that's the Big Bang already. There's no point, no need to go anywhere, but we can. So let's do it. Let's make art and cities and planets and ships and poetry and love and all those things. Let's go somewhere with it, right? But ultimately, that's all that's really going on. Intimacy, awareness, That
was such a beautiful story. I sort of like I was just visualizing you telling that, and the eye contact and the silence, and him just saying that, and Big Bang, like wow, like, yeah.
Yeah.
Sebastian, are you similar to Ken, where you guys both don't have children? And what's your perspective and POV on children?
Yeah, my brother just had a kid. The most beautiful girl, and his wife. They're so beautiful together, the three of them. There are different ways, right, to bring life into the world. And Ken is described like a human, is really a pattern of intelligence, if you will. Not just brain intelligence, but intelligence on a lot of levels, right? Poetically, emotionally, etc. Sentience, life force. And so there's also, like, in the very Jungian way, what is the world asking of me? What is the cosmos asking? What's God asking to come through me? And I've got to be loyal to that thing. And it takes on a number of different possible adventurous roads, right? And we only know what ocean to swim or what bridge to cross when we arrive. Like, it's so important going in to have a plan. But then once we get in, like, we don't really know. Like, we don't know. And we only know when we're at that space, you know? When Moses split the Red Sea, right? It's like they're going down and like they're like, it's not looking so good, but they go anyways and the sea splits, right? I like to, and there's a lot to be told. That's a show in and of itself that we can get into. But I think that Ken, for instance, he's arguably the most brilliant human ever, I mean, Plato, Aristotle, right? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Tinus, whatever, who contemporarily Einstein, blah, 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 blah. I mean, Ken's that mind, and so his writing, is giving birth to so much on such a broad level, both depth and span, that it's, in some way, he's fathering so many children through that. So, and you look at people who are sometimes really prolific, and sometimes the challenges they have with their kids is like not so great. A lot of times families, it didn't turn out so well. A lot of times, and sometimes it does. I'm not saying that there's a loyalty to one or another. This is not a situation of mutual exclusivity. But I think that anything can be our greatest teacher, right? And that can be writing, that can be illness, that can be romance, that can be love, and that can absolutely be children. And I see it right with my brother, and it's something that I don't have kids, that I would like it. Yeah, sure. But it's got to be with the right girl at the right moment. It's got to be with the right person, the right man, the right, whatever the couple is. In other words, I think the most important, the duty is to say, and to have a posture to say, hey, we're bringing something into the world here, whether even if it's adopting or whatever the thing is, that we're going to learn from, right? But we're stewards to the world in this way. We're going to bring this life force into the world, or cultivate and raise this life force to make the world more beautiful, to help support the world in being more graceful, to cultivate depth and connection in the world. Then that's a great thing, It's a great thing. Can be.
When you brought up lucid dreaming, recently I've been sort of waking up, writing down my dreams. And the main catalyst was I used to have cold sweats, and then I heard from somewhere that another person was getting cold sweats and it sort of rooted his childhood trauma. So I was like, all right, let's start writing down my dreams. Like, what am I dreaming about? And then I find myself consistently dreaming about high school experiences. So I'm writing them down, like, okay, how did I feel in this dream? Okay, and then I'm accepting my high school experience. I'm accepting sort of what happened. And over time, the cold sweats started going away. The high school dreams started going away. And now I'm getting different types of dreams. And these dreams, they feel so real. I'm definitely not lucid. I'm definitely not aware I'm in it. It feels like I jump into this parallel universe of a different version of me in this sort of apocalyptic world, and I'm thrown in this situation, and I'm writing it the next morning. I'm seeing how I feel about that. I'm learning from these different versions of Andy, and it feels like the dreams, like all the different versions of Andrew, are growing in parallel. Like the fact that I'm no longer getting those high school dreams means I've closed that chapter, and all the versions of Andy's are now sort of onto that next chapter. And yeah, I just brought this up because you talk about lucid dreaming. That's something I have not learned or tried to experience, but that's my experiences with dreams so far.
That was gorgeous. I feel the same way. I don't know how many alternate universes we're having this conversation in, but I like all of them. Very much so. Yeah, that's really, I think that your sense of awareness there and the way you express that about all the Andys, yeah, is really, that's a pretty intuitive, transcendent awareness. And I think that's like, what a great statement that is, yeah, for practice. Like, that's really gorgeous. So I think and Ken would even talk about, like, intelligence is marked by the ability to hold perspectives, right? The more perspectives an individual can hold, the greater the intelligence. Mine, yours, ours, right? Collectively, where does it go? How do people interpret it? Where is it being felt, etc.? Like God's perspective, it's, that, what's even inside of me, what's, one drive is emotional, one's intellectual, one's vocational, one's evolutionary, and the more we can be aware integrally, right, of all those perspectives, right, the greater kind of intelligence that we're operating in the world. And the way that you said all these Andes, I think, indicates that as a wonderful indicator for, a practice of saying, wow, there's unlimited numbers of me, but let's say at least a dozen or something, or a few, right? And how can any situation turn out, right? And it's a great way to think about a day. Yeah. Because then you start thinking about, what am I going to choose to do? And you think, well, look, I could go to this party. What's going to happen there? Or I could work on this. I could go exercise, or I could go read this, or be with this person. And wow, if there was a bunch of me doing all these things, which is the one I want to be the most? And there's not a right or wrong answer. And that's important to know. But the correct way, if you will, in terms of right path, wrong path, right, is go with the one you want to be, right? And the one you want to be is not always the one you want to do, right? The one you want to do might be go to the party, or it might be read the book, whatever. But the one you want to be, that's the one to go with. And I think that's, in the same way. And sometimes they agree, sometimes the one you want to be is the way you want to go and what you want to do. But like when Grace and Grit came up, I didn't choose it really. It chose me, like I'd read Ken's work. We had met, we'd become close. He, doesn't give a lot of interviews, and he didn't then, and he gave me one for my documentary film so generously. And then Grace and Grit came up later. I'd asked him about it at the time. I said, this would make such an amazing movie. And someone else had the rights, a very big company here had the rights at that time. And then later it kind of came, and I was thinking about it, and I thought, oh my God, it was inside of me. And I was like, something like, it was nonverbal, but something like, I have to make this. And I emailed him and I asked him about it. Like, what's the story with Grace and Grit? Where is it with the option, and who owns it? And he was kind of like, let me check. And then he got back to me, and there was a possibility there. And then I just felt all the energy going that direction. And it's not that I did want to do it or didn't want to do it, but I thought, wow, if I achieved that, that's really something, that's really something to bring into the world. And that's worth dying for, meaning that's worth living for, right? That's worth the price of the candle. So I think that statement about, I'm dreaming, and all these different Andes are like closing some chapter, and that chapter looks different in every experience of every world that Andy's in. One is about letting go of high school or something there. And in another world, it's that version of Andy driving past something else. But absolutely, I think that deep awareness of driving past that in this life, in this world, also implies moving past it in the other existence. Yeah. And very much so. Very strong on that path, because, and I can even express it in very actual terms. When, Jung talks about archetypes, and Joseph Campbell expresses that as like the kind of foremost writer about archetypes, kind of after Jung, and myth, really. Dreams and archetypes, therefore, bubble up, from the subconscious and from the gut without specific shape and visage. And then the conscious mind attaches avatars to that content in order to make sense of it. So you'll use a spider or the car you saw the day, or high school or whatever, to process something. But it's really just the content. If you take all that stuff out of it, it's really just consciousness in its rawest form, right? And so if you're getting over, let's say, or passing through or moving through some blockade or something, or some rite of passage in some experience, let's say for you in high school, something you experienced, really, it doesn't matter, right? What it is, high school, what it looks like, what the thing looks like. It's really like, if you think just on an energetic level, right? It's just this energy that's transforming, yeah? And that's archetypal, and that's mythic. That's mystical then going forward, right? That's going beyond. And, and that sort of beautifully dovetails back into the beginning of our conversation about kind of life and well, you go and you die, and so what, right? Because it is really just this energetic force that's being, perpetuated forward and outward. And, the perpetuation of that force is a play, yeah? And it's a self-aware play, and it finds self-awareness, right, through each other, through intimacy, and then even individually alone through kind of just feeling it, in the same way you felt the bug in your house. I put a pin on all this. I met Joseph Campbell when I was a boy at a moonrise in Hawaii, in Waimanalo, where he and his late wife, Jean Erdman, lived before they both passed. And I was a boy, I was a kid, and I didn't know who he was. My father took me to this moonrise, and we met, and he had this impact on me. He shook my hand, and I actually ran into him on the path in the middle of the night going down the beach with my father, and he said hello to my father, and I met him, and then we left, and that was it, right? But that night he was talking about synchronicity. So then many years later, long after he's passed, because I was a little kid when he passed, I went to go see his wife, Jean Erdman, at her home on Diamond Head in Honolulu, in Hawaii. And she has this sort of mini museum devoted to kind of myth in Hawaii and Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey and such. And I was like looking through stuff, and I was like, can I look at like this? Like something called me to kind of open this closet, right? And I was like, can I look in there? She was like, sure, Sebastian. And I open up, and I remember that night Joe Campbell was wearing this Aloha shirt. And I open up that closet, and there's that shirt, and I thought, so many years have gone by, and something is totally different. And yet something is exactly the same. And that's it. Yeah. That's the dance across the night sky through the stars that we all are. That's synchronicity. That's the awareness of this spectacular play that's unfolding through us, between us, around us, beneath us, beyond us.
I want to sort of share this last sort of experience that I've had and get your read and perspective on it as I'm sort of trying to unpeel this sort of onion. A year ago, I was sort of having a conversation with my dad. He talked about how when I was young, I used to cry all the time. And my mum would take me to the doctor, and the doctor would have no idea why I would cry. My dad said that he thought the reason I cried all the time was that I was unhappy to be brought into this world, this family. Maybe because, it was like a more lower income family. It wasn't the best sort of situation, but he thought I was crying because I was not happy. And when he shared that, I was like, wow. Like, I always was an angry kid. I was always like, if I couldn't get a math question, I was angry at myself. I was angry at the world. And I was like, wow, like I do remember being very angry when I was a child. And then sort of many years passed by. And then last year I was in New Zealand. I was sort of sitting next to this Hindu priest. And I was like, could you give me a Hindu name? He was like, yeah, sure. And he looked at me, I gave him my name, and he said, your name is Amma, which is like the male version of Amaji. And Amma means immortal. And then another string of connections happened. I was like, wow. Like, I do feel like that the moment I was born, I was like, man, here we go again. I'm going to have to learn how to speak. I'm going to have to learn how to communicate. I'm going to have to learn how to meet people and learn how to swim, archer, sail, and pick up all these skills all over again and go through this journey of life. And then recently in Mongolia, I was talking to this lady, and she was talking about how God is from within, and people go through life again, reincarnating again and again, and until you can really sort of tap into that God from within, do you really break free from this cycle of sort of constant reincarnation. When she said that, I was like, wow, like, man, I do feel like I'm getting close. This may or may not be the last reincarnation, but each time I'm getting closer. I'm building enough skill sets to discover that whatever that is, to stop this constant cycle. And each time I get a bit closer, each time I get born, I'm like, here we go again. And this is sort of where I'm at right now. And I don't know, maybe in a year's time I'll have another incident that ties things together again. But yeah, that's something I really wanted to share just after having this conversation with you, Sebastian.
It was a beautiful expression. I really enjoyed that, and I appreciate it. And the that sense of getting off the dharmic wheel, right? Like leaving samsara, yeah, and awakening, yeah, and that, like, in the very kind of Buddhist sense, right? If you fast forward life like 100 years, or let's say 1,000 years, or let's say 1,000,000 years, or let's say 100 million years, or let's say 1,000,000,000,000 years, or let's say, like, essentially you go so many trillions of years in the future, right? I mean, it's really God experiencing that through all consciousness, through all sentience, and so then therefore through all people too. And so I think it happens at the same time. The whole thing, as robust and complex and outrageous and majestic as it is, and turns back in on itself and then starts again, like the in-breath and the out-breath, right? It's just again. And each breath is different. Like when we sit down at the beach and we listen to the waves hitting the shore, and each wave has a different sound, but they all sound identical also, and so much so that when we sit down at the shore and we are talking, let's say, to someone, and we hear that, at first it's so right there in our field of awareness, but then after a while it disappears because that's the sound we came out of. At some point, it's background. We don't hear it anymore, And so in that way, at some point, life becomes just background. We don't hear it anymore because we've done it so many times, so many hundreds or thousands or millions or trillions of times. And I think that's the exercise for God. It's this expression of manifestation and separateness, and then againness, And so I think that the Buddhist expression of that is gorgeous. Your expression of that is gorgeous. And I think that, the pathways to say, hey, at some moments I want to exit the life. It dovetails back also to the top of our conversation. And other moments, no, I want to be right here in the samsara, right? Like that's instead of the Buddha, that's the Bodhisattva, right? That's, Bodhisattva, the Lord who looks down, the Lord who comes down, who comes back down again, in other words, to awaken everyone else, right? The Bodhisattva, like, I've reached the point where I'm ready to exit samsara, but I can't leave yet because I gotta help some other people out. I gotta give some more, I gotta reduce some more suffering before I go, right? And I think what's important, in the kind of sense that we have this sense of morality, yeah, right? That's beyond morality because it's not about good or bad or right or wrong. It's just about play and awareness. And then when we feel that awareness, like in the same way, I love the way you said, oh my God, I learn to swim again. I got to learn to talk again. Like, oh my God, of course I'm angry. Like I've done this already. Enough. That's cool. And I think that's appropriate. And that dovetails back into the Monopoly game too, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna cling on a little bit, let go a little bit, and like, all right, yeah, fuck it, roll the dice, let's jump in there and do the thing again, because the implication, right, is really for life, like we look at the way life extrapolates, like it just in our fingerprints, like it's pretty amazing, it's pretty remarkable. Like you cut your finger and then pretty severely, and then not too long later, like the fingerprint starts to match up again, right? And so you did that. You match those fingerprints without ever thinking about it. You just did that. You just healed without doing a thing, right? So that's coming through us all the time. And it implies, in the very way like the Bhagavad Gita at the core level, out of the Mahabharata, is it's going to go again. It goes again. Cry or not cry, laugh or not laugh. It's going. We're sailing. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you so much for your time today. This is such a beautiful conversation. Sebastian, where can people find more about you and sort of get more Sebastian?
Thank you. Instagram, I don't use a lot of social media, but I like Instagram. I return all my messages on there at some juncture. Sebastian Siegel with a digit 1 at the end, Sebastian Siegel 1. Twitter, just Sebastian Siegel. And Grace and Grit in the US, Amazon, Apple, same thing in Canada, internationally, mostly on Netflix is a good one. And if anyone's in California and they want to come to a workshop or to my practice here, I invite that. I hold some different, very interesting think tanks. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. I had so much fun on this podcast. It was definitely a massive onion and I had nowhere to start. I was definitely out of my depth and width because you just have so much experience and we we hit the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, it was definitely a challenge for me, but I'm glad I was able to sort of slowly ease into it and figure my way out through this conversation. So thank you for being so patient. And yeah, I appreciate this conversation.
I really do too, and thanks for your grace and your courage and your instincts and your intuition and for what you're doing, and I hope we get to do it again, please.
I'd love that. Guys, this is the end of the podcast. I had a blast today. Hopefully you guys got some value, and I'll see you guys next week with another episode. Peace.